so happy to see you all, and very blessed to have this opportunity to talk. My caveat, though, is that I want to talk to you today from the perspective of just being Nikki Jackson, not necessarily Nikki with the Fed or Nikki in the community, but I want to be authentic and raw and vulnerable as I go through this talk today. I want to share with you my story, my genesis, if you will, and the extent to which that story informs how I view the world as a woman, as a African American, and as an African American woman. So, these are my parents. My mother was born and raised in Jim Crow South in Marietta, Georgia, 1940. She's the fourth of 8 girls born to my grandparents. And by age 12, she had mastered 11th grade level work. She was, by all accounts, a child prodigy. She mastered the violin by age 8 and the piano by age 10. Her parents then decided to save enough money to send her to a boarding school, hoping to ease the burden of her blackness in Jim Crow South and permit her an opportunity to concentrate on her studies rather than to concentrate on surviving. Her parents poured all that they had into her, their finances, their time, their energy, and the other 7 girls, her siblings, had to just kind of share what was left. And that was hard for my mother, still is hard for her. She has been and still today feels somewhat guilty for her successes. She felt as though her sisters suffered so that she could ascend. And age 76 today, if you ask her about this conundrum, she will still cry about it. She attended Boggs Academy boarding school in North Carolina from ages 11 to ages 16, and Barbara Scotia College from age 16 to age 19. She now holds a PhD from Ball State University in British and American Literature with a cognate in linguistics. She holds a master's degree in Indiana University from University of Bloomington in art and teaching, and she was awarded a full scholarship for both. Her first job, her teaching job, was in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was at Alabama State, which is a historically black college. There she had an opportunity to see Dr. Martin Luther King on several occasions. This was the height of the civil rights movement. Dr. King's home was a few blocks away from her teaching dormitory. As a state employee, though, she was forbidden to participate in civil rights activities. She was forbidden to participate in the March Across Pettus Bridge that Dr. King ultimately organized from Selma to Montgomery. She did, however, join the march in Montgomery, not marching across the bridge as her employer prohibited. And then she went to Lincoln University in Missouri. That's where this photo is from, and she taught in the English department. So my mother's had a great career in English. This becomes important in a moment. And she's had a stellar career in higher education. She's been the dean, the vice president, vice provost, chair of the English department, and had a number of similar positions across primarily HBCUs in this country. In 1992, when I went to Hampton University, she was the chairwoman of the English department. It was always my mother's dream to teach students of color. So my father is from Cincinnati, Ohio. He was the eldest of 8. My father is an unapologetic black nationalist. The problem, though, is that he's insanely sweet and very gentle. He stands at 6'4", a little over 200 pounds. He wouldn't want me to tell his exact weight. But he's quite statuesque and some would argue imposing, but he's a gentle giant. At the age of 18, he left home to attend college at Central State University and decided to thereafter immerse himself in the heart of the civil rights movement. He later transferred to Philander Smith University, which is in Little Rock, Arkansas. That year was 1961. Again, Jim Crow South. So, though my dad's really sweet, he's certainly no coward. While in college, my father was active with SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he was overcome by the passionate rhetoric of then Stokely Carmichael and other believers in the principles of the nonviolent movement, but the efficacy of standing up for your rights. My dad was absolutely hooked into this movement. As a result of that, it took him almost 7 years to complete college, not because he was base, but because he spent so much time being a true freedom fighter. He took semesters off so that he can register blacks to vote in Helena, Arkansas. In Jackson, Mississippi, he ran from the KKK on numerous occasions in Alabama. He met Dr. Martin Luther King and Andrew Jackson in Atlanta, Georgia, and of course, he spent a lot of time in jail, enjoyed a lot of time in jail for his endless sit-ins. It's a wonder that he ever did a lick of homework, as my grandmother would say. And the fact that he graduated at all is quite a feat. So by the time he finished registering blacks to vote, hiding in the woods from law enforcement and avoiding various lynch mobs that were very much a part of the Southern tapestry during his time, he missed several years of college. He never was a believer, and still to this day is not a believer in turning the proverbial cheek as espoused by Dr. King. My father would suggest that the civil rights victories came after black and white blood was shed. So these were the stories that I heard growing up as a child. These were the dinner time conversations. Very different, I would imagine, from the conversations many of you might have heard as you are sitting around the dinner table with your parents and your family members. But as a result of this, I grew up not hating white people, but absolutely being afraid of them. And this was just a byproduct of asking what would be regarded as benign questions to my parents, like, tell me what it was like growing up. Tell me what you did in school. Tell me about your upbringing. Invariably, those brought about conversations that were deeply rooted in the hatred and them having to work through that hatred, them trying to find ways to preserve their dignity and their humanity against a backdrop hell-bent on diminishing it. So, both of my parents were civil rights activists, my dad more so than my mom, but to be clear, both of them have been to jail for seeking freedom, and both of them have been hosed by fire hose for seeking freedom, and both have been spat upon during sit-ins in their home country. My mother has even been attacked by police dogs. They met, though, while working in Lincoln University, which is a historically black college in Jefferson City, Missouri, and that year was 1967, and then they married in 1968, 48 years ago, or maybe 49 years ago at this point. So my dad grew up in higher ed, too. He was on the administrative side and my mom on the academic side. My dad was the dean of financial aid, the dean of student services, and then for a while at Hampton University, he led their student center and the business assistant center. So then there's me. I was born in Jeff City, Missouri, and I'm an only child, at least for now. I'm still holding out hope. I always did very well in school. I did just as I was told most of the time. As a kid, I, like my mother, played the violin. I sang in the choir at church. I was always on honor roll. And I worked. I had a job all through high school and college. So I was, I'd say I was a relatively shiny child. Yeah, so this is a photo of me, middle school, 7th grade, I think, when acne was raging. And I visited the inside of many lockers, as you might imagine, given that outfit. Like, who wears that in 7th grade? I did. It was rough. You know, lunch money was just a fluid concept. I never kept it. So I had a true middle-class upbringing, though, very much so, very kind of middle class. I was very involved in school. I was always trying to find ways to connect in deeper ways with my teachers and with my fellow students. I regard myself as hailing from Hampton, Virginia, only because I went to middle school, high school, and college there. My parents moved around quite a bit. And I was a teenager, probably well before many of you were born, from 1983 to 1989. And in my view, those were the best years in music and fashion. Those are some pretty cool times. That's when hip-hop music was just burgeoning, coming out on the scene, rap music was. At the same time, Hall & Oates, Wham, I don't know if y'all have heard of Wham, Wake Me Up Before You Go. Y'all remember Wham? Okay. Prince, Michael Jackson's Off the Wall album, those were just, fantastic. We had leg warmers, two-tone jeans, members only jackets, penny loafers, probably way before you. Okay, so anyway, that was a time, and I just absolutely adored that time. So during this period of time, my mother was the chairperson of the English department, and she would also bring, as a part of that, just renowned, wonderful literary figures to the campus as a part of her work. And because we lived right on campus, we had a house that was provided by the school, this beautiful Victorian home, right smack dab on the campus of HU. She would bring these writers like Toni Cade Pambera, Nikki Giovanni, Amiri Baraki, James Baldwin, you probably heard of that one, and they would all stay in our home. We had our house was about 150 years old, big, beautiful, 3-story Victorian, and so that's where I grew up. But I will never forget the day that I came home from the movies. I think it was maybe 7th grade, around this shiny time. And I was at the movies with my friends, and my mother was hosting a dinner party for Maya Angelou. And Dr. Angela was staying with us for a couple of days, and Mom had a party, and there were about 15 people there from across the campus and across the community. And as I walked in, the topic of conversation was my most recent English essay. And I got a B on that damn thing, and my mother made copies of it and circulated it around the table to the guests, and then as I was coming in the door, she beckoned me to come and sit down, and Mom was reading various paragraphs from my essay, and each of the folks they were quite empowered in sharing their views about what it was that I did wrong and why I got that B and basically failed. I could have gotten an A if I had just paid more attention to my comma splices, dangling participles, and something about subjective tense. My use of the subjective tense was not mature enough. So as you might imagine, I was absolutely mortified. But beyond the insistence on literary and linguistic prowess, my mom was hell-bent on me being a lady. Young ladies do this and young ladies do that, and always commenting on my posture, always making sure that I didn't overuse colloquialisms and local jargon. My desire to wear jeans too early in junior high brought much dismay to my mother. And then, of course, my desire to abandon that violin. I would say, Mom, I'm 13, come on, nobody else is playing the violin. And she would say, oh, how old was Chopin when he came to prominence? Like, who was that? So that's kind of what my mom was. But she was also very dedicated to me being proud of my skin. Proud of my skin. And I remember taking baths as a young kid, and my mom would always sit kind of leaning on the edge of the sink as I was in the bathtub as a young child, and she would say things like, look at those beautiful little legs, look at those beautiful brown arms, make sure you scrub that beautiful brown elbow, right? So she was constantly emphasizing how beautiful my brown skin was. And then once I was out of the tub, my mom would help me lotion my face, and she would compliment me on my beautiful African nose, and she wanted me to be prideful and not ashamed of my skin. This was the early 1970s. And so my mom's concern, as I understood later in life, was that I be affirmed in the home, as she was worried that as I stepped outside of the house, I wouldn't be. She would say, you're not going to see yourself on the cover of magazines, on billboards, or commercials, or on television, probably. You're not going to see yourself teaching in the classroom. You're not going to see yourself when you go to orchestra rehearsal. You won't drive over bridges or roads named in honor of people who look like you. So it's likely, Nikki, that your history, and your heritage that you read in school will be lackluster or largely inaccurate. So you probably won't have much affirmation of how beautiful you are and how beautiful your skin is. So you need to know how relevant you are, so please keep putting lotion on those beautiful black ashy elbows. And so my dad was then and still now an incredibly doting father. All the time, we spent so much time together. I think the only time that we were apart was between my first 10 and 12 years of life was when I was at school or he was at work. And so every Saturday as a young kid, my dad and I would let my mom sleep, and we would clean the house, and we'd dance to the musical stylings of the Spinners, the Four Tops, the Temptations, Stevie Wonder, and we'd blast this super loud on the 8-track cassette tape, or as loud as that would permit. So my life was very Cosby Show-esque, very Cosby Show-esque. So that brings me to my career. My career choices have been very emblematic of where I find myself in my life. As I mentioned earlier, I graduated from Hampton University. I graduated with a degree in mass media. I had no idea of what I wanted to do with that career. I really wasn't great at mass media-ing. So my dad suggested that I go to law school, so that's what I did. I went to the University of Miami in 1992. So I loved law school. I loved it. Not so much for the law part, but for the finding my voice part. So this was during the Rodney King trial, O.J. Simpson trial. Both of those cases came to full light during my first year in law school. I was awarded a fellowship called the James Weldon Johnson Summer Institute Fellowship, and it was designed to encourage minority law students to continue through law school. So we were given, many of us in this program, it's called JWJ. These were the folks that came in with me this summer before law school to study law. We were given an abbreviated version of the first year of law school. And in that program were folks that I'm happy to call my friends to this day. There was 16 of us, and even in 1992, when we started law school, we were told by many white students at the University of Miami that we were affirmative action babies. I mean, they would call us that because we were in this program. And they were really concerned. There were a lot of students that were really concerned that we were afforded a crutch to get through school when others may not have been able to. Well, I'm happy to say that the 16 of us affirmative action babies are all doing quite well. We have, of this group, 2 company CEOs, 4 general counsels, 1 Fed Reserve exec, 1 philanthropist who was smart enough to marry an NBA player. It's awesome. 2 district court judges and 2 sole practitioners. So those folks who called us the affirmative action babies can suck it. We did wait. So it was there that I met this gentleman. His name, and forgive me, it's a little fuzzy, his name is Irvin Starsky. This man has the biggest heart and the smartest brain of any human being I have ever met. He focused his work that summer, the summer before I started law school, on political asylum. I don't know if you all have heard of that, but the concept really is kind of who gets to flee from their native country coming to the United States kind of in duress. And in Miami at that time, there was 2 main groups of folks that were seeking political asylum, folks coming from Haiti, folks coming from Cuba. And invariably, the folks coming from Haiti would be redirected kind of midstream by the Coast Guard. Folks coming from Cuba would not be. And Professor Starsky argued that there was a facially neutral policy being implemented in a racially discriminatory way. So I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Starsky on this work. He was giving his time pro bono to a lot of the Haitian immigrants, and he was painstaking in his preparation for motion calendars and brief preparations and all the work that he did on behalf of Haitian immigrants. So a few of us law students were commissioned to help write briefs and research case law, and certainly just to hold a suitcase when he was in court. It was at that point that I committed to serve in some sort of capacity where I was going to address and hopefully eradicate discrimination, harassment, unfair treatment, latent or blatant. I became a labor and employment attorney in Florida, and while I loved the labor part, I didn't like the law part so much. It just felt like it was way too mechanical, a little too prescriptive. I had particular disdain for working at that point in a law firm. The culture just seemed a little bizarre. I talk about in this there's a chapter in a book that I wrote, in this book, where I talked about that experience. And I said, as I started my career as a labor and employment lawyer, I learned a great deal about the process and procedure of law and the interplay of the two. I also learned about the degradation of the two and what happens when that dynamic unravels over time. I was able to witness the oftentimes unspoken needs that humans have, we yearn for from work, and that work and the workplaces have the power to usurp and corrupt and destroy psyches and hearts, talent, energy, and joy. But it also has the opportunity to undergird, affirm, validate, sustain, celebrate, and nourish. And it can give life, and it can bring death. Work, that is the psychology associated with work, is particularly powerful, and everyone should really understand that. So I understood that as a young attorney, which is why I never became an old attorney. So I left the practice of law and started doing human resources. So I regard myself even now in this banking role as an HR practitioner at my core. I've been in HR for almost 20 years, and I work in public and private organizations, large and small, East and West Coast. I've worked for great companies and not so great companies, great bosses and hot mess bosses. But it's all kind of informed the tapestry of my professional career. And I've had a couple of positions that have really changed the trajectory of how I work and the opportunities that I've been giving at work. The first such opportunity was when I worked for C.W. Johnson Express. I was the vice president and general counsel for Mr. Johnson. You may know him. He's here in Louisville. And he had a company that was a small trucking company with a school attached to it. So I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. So this is where everything changed for me when I met Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, larger than life, he too is a very kind of statuesque human being, and it was held in high regard in our community. And as a result of that, in demand for a lot of board work and community work, none of which he wanted to do, quite frankly. So he would send me as his surrogate to a lot of these events and a lot of these board meetings. And on one occasion, I had the opportunity to meet Matthew Barzin and his wife, Brooke. And does anybody know Matthew Brooke? Okay, so Matthew at the time was working as he had his own computer tech company, and he was working out of his home, and Brooke, his wife, is the daughter of Christy Brown, of the Brown Foreman family. And Matthew shared with me that he was hosting an event at his home for John Yarmouth, and that John Yarmouth at that point was determined that he wanted to run for United States House, and he was looking for supporters. So he asked me if I had any experience in politics. Of course, I said absolutely not. And he said, well, do you want some? And I was like, absolutely not. So he said, well, would you be open to having coffee at my house? We're going to bring down a couple of folks from the community, a couple political leaders. We're going to bring some folks from the region, from Illinois, from Michigan, who are also already in the house to help us with these conversations. So I was like, okay, cool, I'll have coffee. So the first person I meet when I go to have coffee at Matthew's house happened to be the then Senator Barack Obama. And it was ridiculously embarrassing. Look at my hair. Let's start with that. Didn't even comb it. I mean, I was blowing the whole thing off. So anyway, I walk in and I meet Barack Obama. And interesting fact, I don't know if you all know this, but in 2007, after Barack Obama declared his candidacy for president, the first fundraiser that was hosted for him was actually here in this building, in this room. The Brooke Brown family hosted it here for then Senator Obama. So little known fact. All right, so then I had a chance to meet with our future president, which was really cool, but also in the room were a whole bunch of other folks who later would influence my career. One such person, of course, Christy Brown, Matthew's mother-in-law. And Christy introduced me to this guy. His name is Jonathan Miller. Jonathan, at the time, was the state treasurer. He was running for governor. Okay, so we were all kind of in this room commiserating with then Senator Barack Obama and talking about John Yarmouth's campaign. And at the same time, Jonathan asked me if I had any experience in fundraising. He expressed an interest in really getting to understand the black community in Louisville. He's from Lexington, and asked if I would help with that as a part of his bid toward running for governor. And I said, yeah, of course, I'll help you to the extent I can, because clearly I speak for all black people. So we helped, I helped him as much as I could, did a couple fundraisers for him, and ultimately, right before the primary, he threw his support to Governor Beshear, Steve Beshear at the time, and so Steve Beshear prevailed in 2007, and Jonathan was selected by Governor Beshear as the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Administration Cabinet. One cabinet post remained unfilled, and that was for personnel, human resources. So Jonathan told the governor a little bit about me. The governor-elect called me and asked me if I would considered taking this position. At this point, I was working at Norton Healthcare. I had been in that job all of maybe 2 months. And I just thought it was an opportunity that I could not refuse. So then this happened. I got appointed to the job. I became cabinet secretary. Super weird. All right, so I was 37 years old at the time. I was 37 years old, and it was 2007, and it was December. And so Governor Beshear appointed me to this role, and I felt like I was being plucked from private sector, being plucked from obscurity. I mean, it was absolutely insane. And I had no exposure to the politics of politics, right? So this is an entirely different role. It's not just a role where you're kind of governing the personnel functions and the human capital methodology for 37,000 people. You're also a political appointee, so you kind of got to toe the line a little bit. So December 17th in 2007, I began cutting my teeth in public sector, and the governor asked me to do a lot of work in strategic HR, to focus on how we can bring our human capital together, start building platforms around diversity and inclusion. I mean, all music to my ears. It was fantastic. He was amazing to work for. All right, so then after a couple years of doing that, I left and I moved to Arizona, and I worked for Maricopa Community Colleges District. I was the vice chancellor of HR there. And then I moved to Miami, Florida, back to Miami, and I became the vice president of HR for a company called Charter Schools USA. So then my family and I was married at the time, we came back to Louisville. My then husband was working for Humana. And at this point, a friend of mine who I had met when I was working in state government, who ran for United States Senate, I don't know if you knew that about our wonderful mayor, started out and ran for U.S. Senate trying to unseat Mitch McConnell. Didn't work, but what thankfully did work was his bid for mayor. And so I come back to town, and Greg Fisher's the mayor, so that's pretty cool. So I talked to Greg about what could I do now that I'm back in town, and he told me a little something about this organization called the Federal Reserve, and that their formidable leader, Maria Hampton, might be retiring or will soon be retiring. I should throw my name in the hat, and I did, so here I am. Okay, so just a quick plug on the Fed. If I've not had an opportunity to talk with you more personally and deeply about the work of the Federal Reserve in this area, I'd love to do that. That is part of my responsibility. My job is an outreach-focused one, so I'd love to touch base with you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing and your contributions, your many contributions to our healthy economy, and I'd love to share with you a little bit about the Fed. All right, enough with that. I'm sure I'm running out of time. Okay, so let me get to my convictions, the clarity of convictions that I have. So let me talk about me as a woman. When I was cabinet secretary, it was not an easy role. I still love that job, but I was referred to with some regularity by many legislators in Frankfurt as gal, girl, chick. And I remember one time while attending an event at the governor's mansion, I can't even tell you how many times I was given the coat check ticket or empty wine glasses with full expectation that I would be refilling them. And then I kept thinking, my God, am I equal to men? Am I really equal to men? So it just was frustrating for me in that regard. But for most of my life, I've been somewhat unclear and therefore unable to articulate in an assertive way for you, for me, for my family, my uniqueness. Beyond my job, beyond my role as a mom, beyond my role as a professional, a community leader, or a daughter, or a friend, all of those roles, for the most part, are externally defined, right? They're all externally defined. And so I've always struggled with trying to define who is Nikki, the woman. Who is Nikki, the woman? Hell, for the longest time, I've had the hardest time answering the question what my hobbies are. Like, what the hell is a hobby? So I just felt like I was just kind of spiraling in this world of externally defined imposition. So in truth, though, I think many women have a similar plight. I think a lot of us walk through our lives with our tongues hanging out in a constant state of being mystified and overwhelmed because we've been sold a bill of goods, at least in my generation, that we could all have it all, and we have to have it all, or we'll somehow sacrifice the women's movement. So don't get me wrong, I'm a supporter, an encourager, an example in many ways of equality among the races and gender, and I deplore discrimination in all of its forms, but I don't mind differentiation, and I don't mind differential treatment. And that's because in my role as a woman, I am not a man. I am different from a man. So why do we seem to care so much about the role of women in our society? Maybe because we don't want to we don't want to disrupt our own dissonance. It's important that we know what we are, so we know what to assign to you. We know what expectations to impose on you. Some I have heard in my family say they miss the good old days when men were men and women were women, and the ease of assigning my narrative to what you are. I know what it means for you to be a boy or what it means for you to be a girl. I'm bringing that narrative to you. So it's less about gender identity and sexual orientation and more about role clarity and ease of narrative assignment. So in my view, again, equal does not mean same, but I do want to clarify the plight. I think for women, for years, we have sought equality in the form of being same. So we might have done ourselves a little bit of a disservice in touting our sameness, because we're also then insisting on uniformity, which may not always be appropriate. I don't think we all need to burn bras to be equal. I don't think we all need to work outside of our homes to be treated equal. I don't know that we all need to climb the proverbial corporate ladder to be considered equal. But we don't also need to chase having it all like rabid dogs in the name of being equal. So my concern is that we've been focused so much on fighting for our rights and so much for achieving and being thought of as the same as men, so obsessed with achieving everything in our work and work in the community, and that we've forgotten the value of our difference and rejected in some way the many ways in which the differences that we have, that I have as a woman, as a nurturer, my leadership lens, my sensibilities, and my desire for balance, those are the kind of attributes that have shaped communities, that have shaped lives. So those are important. They shape our neighborhoods and our homes. So the last thing I want to talk about is my view of my role as an African American, who I am as a black person. In law school, I was arrested. And I was arrested for talking back and for attempting to hit a police officer. I have been called the N-word more times than I can count. I've watched my father and my ex-husband and my son be humiliated by police officers during routine traffic stops. I have been written up at work by a previous employer right here in this city because I was told, now remember my background, remember my upbringing, that my diction was intimidating, that I used too many big words, and that I thought I was better than some of my peers. I was actually written up for that. So there's no way that I can go through these experiences and still feel at 46 years old that I am viewed as equal. Doesn't mean that I don't feel equal, but it's difficult to view myself as equal. I believe that I'm being viewed as equal. Just yesterday, I received an email from a young woman that I'm mentoring. She was a 2014 summa cum laude econ major at Hampton University. She wrote me the following. She said, Nikki, can we schedule another call when you're free? I just need to talk to you about my job. I really do love it, but I'm facing some questions. I'm facing some adversity in the workplace. At my current job, I feel like I'm being blacklisted for being educated and being black at the same time. I've been told, without being actually told, I gotta dumb myself down. People are uncomfortable around me because they think I'm too articulate, that I know too much. Please know that I don't try to make anyone feel like they don't know anything, and I'm always trying to help. I don't know what to do. She, like me, thought that her excellence, her articulation, her confidence, and her strong command of King's English would be an asset. And so many times, more times than I care to mention, for some bizarre reason, it becomes very difficult in the workplace to be excellent and be black. So part of what I fear, I am very busy in my life, and some of that is because I have a very hard time focusing on today. I focus a lot on what's happening tomorrow. I have a hard time being still. And in truth, if I'm honest, some of that fear of being still is because I struggle today standing here, especially today standing here in these times. I struggle with reckoning with my deep, unyielding, painful feeling of abandonment and rejection by the only country that I know. This is my home. And I wouldn't say that this is a new fear, it's just one that has endured for a while and now feels as though it's metastasized. There seems to always be this possibility based on the data, based on experiences, based on tradition, based on rearing, based on ideology, based on mental models, that my blackness would matter in a way that my humanity doesn't. And I never know when those moments might occur in any given day. So this is not new, it's just kind of transformed. So the things I find, all of us, the things that we stand in we stand defending the most are the characteristics that we have no control over. What color our skin is, what gender we are, where we grew up, who our parents are. We stand in defense of those kinds of attributes, and those aren't the things that we don't have control over. So choices appropriately should be subject to scrutiny, but heritage shouldn't be. There's a lot of painful history lessons to be learned, I think, in this, and although I am ridiculously disgusted by black-on-black crime, I kind of get it, though, at least from a psychological legacy of self-hatred, but I guess I'll just never understand racism. I guess I'll never really understand that, and I don't understand why my son is 22 years old. He goes to school at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, in Savannah, and so he travels from here to there when he's on vacation, on break, and not every time, but enough times he's stopped. He has a nice car. He's an articulate, smart kid. And I guess, when he was 16 years old, when he got his driver's license, we gave him the car, we gave him the insurance card, and we gave him the spiel. My ex-husband took him outside and said, here's how you handle the cops when they stop you. Not if, when. Here's how you spread your legs. Here's how you show your hands. Make sure you don't reach without being asked. Make sure you make eye contact. Make sure you say yes sir, no sir. Make sure you don't do anything that will bring concern to the police officer, because you may not survive the stop. So that's the reality. And he has to practice that. He has to practice that every time he's engaging with one. So I don't understand that. I don't understand why Rodney King was unmercifully beat and why the police officers who did so were not prosecuted. I don't understand how George Zimmerman was found not guilty of killing Trayvon Martin. I don't understand how the officer who shot Michael Brown in Ferguson and left his carcass laying in the street for hours, I don't understand how he was not imprisoned. I don't understand how unarmed and otherwise subdued black men are slain by police officers with fair regularity. Not all police, just bad cops. I don't understand why they're choked to death for saying that they can't breathe. I don't understand why a child who's 12 years old, the same age as my daughter, would be shot to death in a park for playing with a toy gun. That child's name was Tamir Rice. So what happens now is that, as is the case with my parents and my parents' parents, my fear today was their fear yesterday, and that is, how do I protect my children? How do I protect myself and my family, my loved ones, from those who are meaning them harm? And sometimes those who mean them harm are the very folks who are supposed to be protecting them. I just don't know what to do with that. And then I also don't know what to do, quite frankly, speaking as Nikki and not as the Fed, with the current climate that we find ourselves in politically. Not so much our president, but the circumstances giving rise to his ascension and the sentiment that seems to prevail to support his ideology. So I do wonder about Dr. King. 53 years ago, he talked about that promised land. It seems to sometimes be receding further and further. But I will say this, I love my life. I believe that my life is absolutely perfect. This is a reality, though, that will challenge me probably for the rest of my perfect life, and that's okay. I have a great support system, great community, great friends, great job, great boss to help me through it. But one of the questions that was asked of me as I was preparing for this talk today was, how do I think about bias and how might we remedy it? And my answer, unfortunately, is I don't know. So my time is up, and I thank you for yours.